if you miss next week or the week after, don't worry. But I'm going to record and you can see them. I'll put them on YouTube, or you can ask me for a recording. So welcome again. So what we're going to do is, I thought what we do is we're going to read a contemporary. First, we'll read a little bit about a contemporary Jewish thinker, about different ideas of the divine, different views of God, how we understand, maybe define God. Then we're going to look at some high holiday liturgy, some prayers from the high holiday, and use the short essay we've read to help us think about that prayer. And then we'll see where the discussion takes us. So, hold on 1 second, let me put something here.
Yeah.
Never look at the notes. So first, I'm going to ask you all, people here and people at home, Rabbi my wife works with, David Ingber, he says the Zoomagog and the Roomagog. When I give you the title, what's God got to do with it? What are you thinking?
So
what love got to do with it, right? Very nice. So okay, but let's take it to the next level. What are you thinking?
Seriously, why is it God?
Why?
Why God?
Why God? What does God have to do with
The world, with spiritual, with
Good.
everything.
what? Yeah, good. What do we need God for? You're saying?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. What? Good. We'll see. We'll talk about that. Okay. How about you all at home? What are you thinking about? What are you feeling? Anybody?
muted.
Yeah, whoever's.
Several of them are muted.
Everybody's muted. So if you
Can you hear me now?
yeah, Philly.
Excellent. I immediately think, what is God?
What is God? Okay, good.
And where is God?
There, good. So you're thinking of a spatial question, where, but also kind of a what question, right? Like I don't know, an ontological question, if you will.
It's a spiritual question. What is God?
Good. Anybody else? Yes, Mary.
I'm thinking that without God, we wouldn't be here celebrating a new year, or so, you have to remember that if you believe that God created us, that he's here and he has a lot to do with it.
So Mary, you're already kind of giving a definition as creator. You're already giving the presupposition that God is a creator, that there is something that created us. So good. So let's go into our first discussion, or our first reading that I am going to put up. I'm going to share for you all. So I got this, the snippet I gave you comes from, if you're at home, or if you're here, this one comes from an anthology called American Jewish Thought since 1937 or 1934. But the reading I want to do is from this guy, Arthur Green. He's a rabbi. He's a scholar of Jewish mysticism. He's also the head of a rabbinical school in Boston called Hebrew College. He is a very prolific writer. And one of the works he wrote is called Ehyeh, Seek My Face. And that's what we're going to read a snippet from. So for you at home, turn to the one that starts with B. You see that? Okay, can everybody see it if you're in your own home? Okay, so I'll give a taste of Arthur Green. Arthur Green was ordained as a conservative rabbi. He grew up in Newark. I think he's in his 80s now, in his early 80s. He grew up in Newark. He was ordained as a conservative rabbi, but he became a scholar at Brandeis University for a long time of Jewish mysticism. And he's written a lot about mysticism and Hasidut, about Hasidism. He would call himself a neo-Hasid. He is a non-Orthodox Jew influenced by Hasidism, but his non-Orthodox read of Hasidism, and that's what we're going to see, his read of mysticism. And his big idea, I think that he's trying to get through the snippet that we're going to read, is that let's not think of God as up there. Okay? So let's read.
Rabbi, is he
Yes.
the same author who wrote Radical Judaism?
He wrote that Judaism, exactly, which
I know,
really carries on these thoughts. And then at the end, if we have time, we'll read a little bit. We'll read a story he gives from his newest book called Judaism for the World. Okay? So let's have someone here in the room with me. So someone want to read the first paragraph? Meg, please.
God above, God within. The particular ancient Near East culture out of which the Jewish people, our own religion, emerged was one that worshipped sky gods, especially after the Bible eliminated polytheism with its pantheon of gods and concentrated on the deities and their powers into one. The primary residence of God in the heaven was firmly established. From its very earliest origins, Jewish, hence also Christian, Islamic, and Western, and general Western conceptions of God were tied to this vertical metaphor for the God-world relationship. Where does God live? The child is asked. Up there is the answer expected of a 3-year-old with a finger pointed toward the heavens. True, we also hope that he or she will sweep a hand around and say everywhere. And eventually, though probably not quite but probably a few years later, point inward to the heart as well. But the first answer is expected is that which reconfirms for yet another generation the myth of verticality, the root metaphor of our Western understanding of the relationship between God and the world.
Okay, stop. So now we have to point out that I think he said 2 or 3 times metaphor, right? So when we talk about God, we speak in metaphors. Because, well, why? Why?
How could we know for real?
Right, so Philly says, how can we know for real? We're not making scientific statements that you can test a hypothesis and give a scientific theory of God, right? So throughout time, there have been, especially in the Middle Ages, people who wrote kind of philosophical proofs for God. But I think Green and others today would say there's no proof for God, right? There is experience that we have in the world. We can experience different things that we can call the divine or spirituality or things like that. But when we speak of it, when we put that into human language, that's metaphor, right? So what does he say? What has been the primary metaphor for God in the Western world? Up there, right? A vertical metaphor, as he's saying, right? Okay. Right, so what do we say? What kinds of vertical metaphors do we use a lot at the High Holy Days about God?
God is a judge.
Judge, good. A judge literally sits above the people in the courtroom. King, right? Good. We're going to explore that a lot, the king, in a minute. Okay, what else? Or, in heavens, right? Right, so, like Christians in English say, our Father who art in heaven, right? They got that from us. That's a Hebrew phrase, Avinu Shebashamayim, right? Right, or Ribono Shel Olam, which means the master of the world, right? These are all Hebrew phrases that seeped into Christianity too, right?
There's also an image of God, a metaphor of God as a bird.
Yeah, there's lots of different metaphors, but when we initially think, right? What does a child think? Old man in the sky, right? We think of sky metaphors, right? Okay, good. So Someone read the next paragraph, please.
As much as we outgrow such thinking in our strivings for mature religion, the image of, quote, God above never quite leaves us. It is reinforced every time we read a psalm about God who, quote, dwells in heaven. Every time we tell a story about Moses, quote, going up to heaven to receive the Torah. Every time we encounter a text that speaks of spiritual growth as a series of steps up the cosmic ladder. Even our mystical literature is much influenced by this deep-seated way of thinking. The visionary ascends through the seven heavens before seeing the throne of God's glory. The contemplative binds rung to reach ever greater heights of understanding.
Right, so all kinds of Jewish literature use this vertical metaphor. Mystical literature, philosophical literature, the Torah itself, right? Okay. Who next? Here we go.
But suppose for the moment that we allowed ourselves to be freed from this upper world, lower world way of thinking. Dare we imagine a Judaism less than fully wedded to a single metaphor? Some of our greatest philosophers and mystics surely understood that this way of seeing things could well be replaced by one that spoke in terms of inner and outer, rather than upper and lower. Let us think of the journey to God as a journey inward, where the goal is an ultimately deep level within the self, rather than the top of a mountain or a ride.
Next page. Last page. Right.
Sorry.
Why?
I don't care.
Write it down.
In the clouds. Sorry. Yeah. Right, in the next page, flip the page.
Torah tells us, you can see it on this page here.
Back,
There it
flip
is.
it over.
Oh, I did look.
Yeah, sorry. Great.
Sorry. The Torah tells us that our ancestors were diggers of wells. Let us try to reach for the understanding that flowed as water from the depths of Abraham's well, rather for the moment than the one that came down carved in stone from the top of Moses Mountain. This journey inward would be one that peels off layer after layer of externals, striving ever for the inward truth, rather than one that consists of climbing rung after rung, reaching ever higher and higher. Spiritual growth in this metaphor is a matter of uncovering new depths rather than attaining new heights. Perhaps we could even try to think of Torah itself as having been given at the deepest level of our inner encounter, rather than from the top of the mountain serving as a vertical metaphor for an inward event.
Okay, so what is Green calling for?
Introspection.
Introspection, good. And he's even saying that, yes, there's all these vertical metaphors in Jewish literature, but we can find other ones too, right? We can find inner metaphors like the ideas of wells in the Torah, right? That our literature gives us some metaphors, but also gives us other metaphors. And maybe I think he would argue that today we need these inner metaphors, right? We need to bring these out more. You want to go, Barbara? Okay.
Have we lost our Jewish souls in the course of this exercise? I think not. In fact, we may encounter a certain renewal of vigor in our spiritual language as we work on reading it in this other and by no means entirely new way. I'm not suggesting that all vertical metaphors be eradicated from Jewish sources. This could not be done without destroying all the beauty and ancient charm that makes the language of Judaism so attractive and valuable in the first place. The metaphor needs to be preserved, but it needs to be placed in perspective. Our attempt to replace the upper with the inner as a focus of devotion helps us to see what a central place that single vertical metaphor has in our lives, in the forming of our psyches, as well as our people's religious civilization.
Good, good. So he's not saying we're creating a new Judaism, and he's not even saying that sometimes other metaphors might serve us, right? He is saying something very practical, right? Very pragmatic, that we need to use, he's kind of saying we need to use Jewish metaphor to speak to us in different ways, right? And we're using the literature, I think he's saying, right? It's not that that the Jewish literature, prayers, whatever, are all kind of spiritual tools, right? To bring meaning. And he's saying that the inner metaphor might be speak more meaningfully to people today, right? Okay, so I'll finish. Prayer, our sages surely knew, is an inward act. The compassionate one wants the heart, the Talmud teaches. The locus of activity in human reaching for God is primarily inward, a turning of heart and mind that is attested by, but never fully subsumed within, outward deeds. The Bible's elaborate descriptions of the tabernacle, as you know, the desert sanctuary they had, are read by Jewish authors of many later generations as outward symbols of inward states of devotion and grace, as Israel is told to make a tabernacle that I may dwell within them. That's how he's reading it. This inwardness is not only that of the person, but the shared inner self of the human heart, the human community, and the world around us. Inwardness means that the one is to be found within all beings. We find God by turning into ourselves, to be sure, but also in the inner experiences that we share with others. The inner sight that we develop in such moments that leads us to an ability to see inwardness of all creatures, the inwardness of all creatures, to come to know them as the many faces of the one. So, sorry about the noise, as there's a transition of classes here. So I want to focus on that last, the last phrase, because this is important, to come to know them as the many faces of the one. So if you read Arthur Green's literature, you'll see that he sees God as kind of, the technical term is panentheistic, meaning the whole universe is contained within the one, capital O-N-E, the oneness of God, but God also transcends all of that, is bigger than all of that. So all of us here, and the building, and nature, and all the people of the world, and all the biodiversity in the universe is contained within God, because if you think about it, he would say we're all just part of oneness, right? So like, I like to I'll give a metaphor here, a scientific metaphor. If anybody's a physicist, maybe they'll tell me I'm wrong, but but like, here I am sitting on a chair at a table. If you look at us from the molecular level, there's no me, there's no table. It's just a bunch of atoms and pockets of energy bouncing off of each other, right? We're all it's all part of this oneness of being. I think that's a metaphor to think about it.
So he's not just calling for introspection, he's also calling for a new conception of godness.
Yes, what he would say, it's not new. He would say it's found in certain works, but he's saying we should emphasize this, right? And in his other works, like Radical Judaism, who you brought up, or someone online brought up his work, Radical Judaism. He talks a lot about how that will help us think about living in nature and global warming and things like that. And he brings ethics out of that a little bit. But I bring him because I think it can give us a different perspective that a lot of people, of course, you didn't learn in Sunday school, right? This ain't the God you learned in Sunday school, right? Now we'd have to read more to learn about how does this God command? Does this God, did this metaphor of God create? Did this metaphor of God, right? Things like that. Those are other discussions, but let's take a pause. What do you think so far?
I think this is really important. And I think your metaphor reminds me of in this world, physical world, boundaries are necessary. So you're you, I'm me, that's the table. But in the oneness, there's spiritually, that doesn't exist.
Right, good. So that's what he would say. So like a lot of Hasidic writing would be, but if there is only oneness, how can I experience you as you and you as you and me as me, right? And they would say, well, partly that's our ego talking, right? But partly we need that ego talking for me to be me and you to be you, because we have to live in the regular world too. but it's all just kind of an illusion if you think about it at a different level, right? That's what, like Chabad, if you go to Chabad, don't go to Chabad, but if you go to Chabad, that's really what they believe too. Maybe even more so than this, right? That all of this separateness is really just an illusion in the mind of God.
Then they shouldn't have glass walls in front of the rooms.
Right. Well, you know,
That's one.
there's a different story. Meg, you look perplexed. Although it's hard to tell with the mask on.
No, for me, it goes back to the whole idea of oneness, and it is the whole idea of the shards of light.
Yes, good.
And so everybody's got a piece of God in them. So
Yes.
we're all part of God.
Yes. Right. So Arthur Green is very influenced. He wrote a translation of a Hasidic teacher called the Altar of Ger. And that's a big idea there that we're all kind of the broken shards of the oneness of God. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
So if he talks about bringing God down here,
Yeah.
what's the function? What has been the function of keeping God up there?
Okay, good. What has been the fun? Good. That's a huge question, and maybe help me think about next week. Maybe next week I'll bring a metaphors of God up there, but not an oppressive way, and then we could talk about the function a little bit more. But I would say a critique of the idea of seeing God as the oneness of all, I would say, can mean that you get comfortable with the way the world is, because the way the world is just divinity, right? But that's obviously wrong. I would say I like Arthur Green a lot, but I don't like a lot of this. And on the last session, I'll talk more about myself. But I would say, like, if we really think that the oneness of all is God, then we might get comfortable with the brokenness of all too, right? And unless we have that higher God that's compelling us to ethical action, let's say, right? The commanding God, unless we have that, then it could turn into a life of quietude, right?
But also, historically, isn't there a sense that, that they had to separate God like that, because they saw God in lightning, they saw
Yeah,
God
right.
in trees.
Right. So
And
yeah.
there was the sense of worshiping the material.
Mhm.
And I think historically,
Yeah.
we had to separate out the material from the immaterial
Mhm.
in order to have, a God figure that was beyond nature.
Beyond nature,
So
right.
that we could develop these other rules
Right.
and conceptions. So I think that's part of historically the lineage of it.
Perhaps, and sorry, Arthur Green does write a lot about kind of the evolution of religion in that way, and especially like, was it Philly who mentioned the book? I think it was Philly, the Radical Judaism. That the introduction to Radical Judaism, he reads Judaism in that way. Is now we're evolving, like our religion is evolving in a way that we can see God differently now. That our ancestors had to see God in this way to break away from the world as it was at the time, right?
I think that just as human needs change through history, or I would imagine that the earliest Israelites wanted to think of a protector or a king. So that worked then. That doesn't work necessarily now. So like you said, over time, the vision or the definition of God, well, God's attributes have changed.
Right. Okay, Mary, I saw your hand up.
I just want to say something that my grandson once said to me that I found to be rather profound. We were walking in a park and we saw all these beautiful trees. And he said, can God be a tree? And I said, that is a beautiful question. And I think the answer is yes. So that was just very enlightening to me.
I think kids have an ingrained sense of spirituality that we beat out of them, sometimes in the synagogue. Unfortunately. Yeah. Brian, your virtual hands up.
Yeah, I'm curious, Rabbi. I understand saying God's oneness and separation is an illusion, but can't we think of ourselves as one part of the oneness? Is
Yes.
it necessarily, it's not mutually exclusive to say
Right.
there's oneness, but there's also separation. You can be the sum of the parts.
Correct. And that's why I think Arthur Green, the technical term would be, he calls himself a panentheist and not a pantheist, right? And you're right. But you can see how one can bleed into the other, I think. But it's interesting, all of us are kind of saying we're using these metaphors for God in pragmatic ways. What are we using this for, right? Does it mean that we're using God? Does it mean that God is an actual thing? I don't know, let's hold that right now, okay? Now let's look at High Holiday Liturgy. So if here in the room, you turn to page 76 in the Rosh Hashanah Machzor, I will share it on the screen for those at home. And remind you, if you're at home, you can buy and donate Mishkan HaNefesh, the Reform Machzor for the High Holy Days coming up. So 3.5 weeks we're away. What do we have here? Avinu Malkeinu. So this is Avinu Malkeinu is a very long prayer. The Reformed Prayer Book kind of takes snippets of it throughout the High Holy Days, but if you're at a traditional synagogue, it'll be one long prayer. But what I want to read, well, let's look at it. Remember, Arthur Green is talking about what the predominant metaphor is, the vertical one, right? So what does Avinu Malkeinu mean?
Our Father, our King.
Our Father, our King, right? Right. So it does, the Reformed prayer books don't like to even translate it anymore, right? So it just says Avinu Malkeinu in English, right? Okay. So
Our Mother, our Queen.
well, so okay. So about 20 years ago in the Reform movement, I don't think it made it into the new Machzor, but in the version in the 90s, there was a poem called Shekhinah Makor Chayenu, which meant like Shekhinah is God's female, but it's like present, imminent presence, nearness presence. Makor Chayenu means the source of our life, right? But at the same time, well, so first of all, Malkeinu, our king, right? What is the image of a king?
Man on a throne.
Man on a throne. Okay, so let's hold that image for a minute. But what's an image of father? Is it the same image? No. Hebrew is a binary language where there's masculine words and feminine words, but the neutered words, like in English doesn't have well, I guess we do have English has non-sexed words, right? But the non-sexed words in Hebrew are masculine words. So Avinu doesn't necessarily mean stern father, it means parent. It couldn't just mean parent. But it's supposed to be both. It's supposed to be, the prayer is supposed to be Malkeinu, the king, and Avinu, father, is with you, right? So it's not the daddy knows best father. Well, even though it's not like the stern, supposed to be the stern father, the same image as king. It's the opposite image as king. That's what it's supposed to be, I think.
In both a loving presence.
It's supposed to be loving, and it's supposed to be loving, compassionate and transcendent. Or what in High Holiday Liturgy would be judgment and compassion, right? But first, let's read all the words of the prayer, and then maybe I'll try to change your thinking about it, okay? So, Avinu, I'll read. Avinu Malkeinu, just follow along with me. Avinu Malkeinu ein lanu melech ele ata. Avinu Malkeinu, right? Our Father, our King, right? Almighty and merciful. So that's how they're translating here, right? High and low, let's say, or not low, high and near. You alone are our sovereign, right? You alone are the ruler. They don't like to say king because king doesn't mean anything to Americans, but I lived in Canada where we had a queen. It kind of made sense. Okay. Avinu Malkeinu, Lemancha rachem aleinu. For your sake, show us mercy. For your sake, it says, not for our sake, for your sake, show us mercy. Interesting, think about that. Asay imanu leman shemecha. Act toward us as befits your name. Right? What's God's name here? What does that mean?
Your reputation,
Yeah.
the image that we hold you in.
Right, good. And I think it's specifically also the four-letter name of God that we say in Hebrew Adonai. From ancient sources, talk about that means God's compassion, rachamim. Right? Avinu malkeinu shlach refuah shlema b'cholei amecha. Bring healing and wholeness to the ill among us. Kara roa gezar dinenu. Allay the harshness of the decree against us. What's the decree? Just life, I think. Kotvenu b'sefer geula v'yeshua. Inscribe us in the book of redemption and renewal. Zochreinu b'zicharon tov lefanecha. Remember our goodness and call it to mind. We're not so bad. Can't see it. Just say. Aseh lemancha b'hoshienu. Act for your sake and save us. Shema kolenu, hear our voice. Chatanu lefanecha, we have strayed and sinned before you. Hamol aleinu v'al olaleinu v'tapenu, have compassion on us and our families. Kalei dever v'cherev v'ra'av me'aleinu, halt the onslaught of sickness, violence, and hunger. Kalei kol tsar u'mastin me'aleinu, halt the reign of those who cause pain and terror. Kotvenu b'sefer chayim tovim, enter our names in the book of lives well lived. The book of life, is the older translation said, Chadesh aleinu shana tova, renew us for a year of goodness. Avinu malkeinu chonenu va'anenu, ki ein banu ma'asim, asei manu tzedakah v'chesed v'hoshienu. Maybe we'll sing at the end. Right? Vinu Malkeinu, answer us with grace, for our deeds are wanting, save us through acts of justice and love. So what's the predominant metaphor?
That we are lacking, we aren't where we need to be. And those two different phrases of do it for your own sake is that if we, going back to the previous conversation, if we're part of God, we're soiling the image of the oneness. So when we say do it for your sake, it's that help us to heal so that the oneness that is you can be better.
Right. Oh, that's beautiful. Very nice. Yeah. And I would also say, like, even if we don't want that mystical reading, which is very nice, like you get an A for bringing together everything we're reading. Good. You're showing that this class is working. But even like, if we, as let's say the Jews, as we of the people of Israel, if we are the representatives of God in the world, or we are the ones who are like creating a community to show God's goodness, we can't live up to that. But we need your help to try to live up to that. It's like mutual dependence, right? Because if we're not living up to it, you don't look so good. But we need your help so that we can live up to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's that's real like covenantal thinking, right? We're in this together, God and us.
But it still implies
Mm-hmm.
the level of like there's someone in charge.
It still implies that God can do something.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
exactly.
That God can do something.
Hold the onslaught and hold the rain and.
Right, good. So, okay, so let's talk about God doing stuff. So,
a parallel between the Avinu Malkeinu and the Ten Commandments. The first couple are all about praising God. Oh, you're great. You're number one. You are the only one. And then you get down to like, 4, 5, and 6, and it's now, what can you do for me? And, help me achieve my greatness.
Yeah, but it's, yes, but none of these are saying help me. Are they? What are they saying? We're in this together. There's no me here, there's us.
Okay.
There's no me. So like, what is it saying? So if someone is suffering, you're not suffering, but you're still saying these words, you're saying that other person's suffering is making me suffer.
Yeah, but you're asking God to help.
So
rather
good.
than-
So back to what Meg was saying, how does God do this? Because a whole town in California was wiped off the map the other day, right? God didn't stop that, right? Although a whole town in California, or I can say it this way, a whole town in California was wiped off the map because we love big cars. And I'll just say it stupidly like that, right?
True. Very true.
Yeah. God gave us the sechel, the smarts. God gave us the know-how to mitigate these issues, and yet we're not listening to that, right? So, okay, so like we'll look at one of these specifically, like about the healing, right? Refuah shlema l'cholei amecha. This is very apropos for right now. Here we are sitting in our room still wearing masks, in our shul still wearing masks, because not enough people are getting vaccinated, which is God gave us the world and gave us the ability to heal, right? And we're not taking God up on that, right? In the Talmud, it says you can't live in a town without a doctor, and that it's a mitzvah to listen to your doctor. And if your doctor tells you to do something, I mean, yeah, of course, they're bad doctors, right? You get a second opinions, whatever. But if they tell you to do something, you have to follow that, even if they tell you to eat on Yom Kippur, right? And you would be sinning for not doing that because you would be harming yourself. And it's not even like harming yourself. It's like second, you might be harming yourself. It's the idea that you might be harming yourself, right? So I mean, that's how I like to think about these things. And I think our ancient ancestors saw it that way too, right? Our ancestors were not dumb. They knew that, and that's also, maybe that's also why they talked in the plural, because they knew that it was not one-to-one for you, right? Probably. Maybe some people did, right?
It's so weird to think, though, that there's people who, not Jews, but people who aren't Jews, who came from Jewish thinking, who still think, and
Well, but there are Jews who still
some
think,
Jews, some Jews who think that they don't have a role to play
Yeah.
in making these things happen, that God's going to do it all.
Right, yeah,
Don't worry about taking the vaccine.
Right.
Don't wear a mask. God's going to take care
right.
of you.
It's not many Jews think that according to surveys in America, but yes.
No, but
Yeah.
but there are some
Yeah.
Haredi Jews, for example,
Yeah.
in Israel.
Well, that's more like not, sorry, the Haredi Jews is more because they read into the conspiracies that it's not good for fertility, but yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but no, there are some people like that,
Where
yeah.
did that come from?
Where did it come from?
It's certainly not.
Well, it's kind of the paradox. If you believe, that's why the Torah never uses the word almighty, right? If you read the Torah, God definitely has limits on what God could do in the world. Or maybe you could read it, God self-limits so that we are able to do in the world, right? And so, but it's kind of the paradox that if you believe in a God that's active in the world, why should I do anything? Actually, I was talking about this with the bar mitzvah kid today. And we're reading the Torah portion, Chayei Sarah, where Abraham buys a plot to bury Sarah, right? And we were talking about it. He's like, well, why did he do that? If God says he's going to have the land anyways, why did he need to buy some real estate? Well, we talked about, well, you have to take the first step, right? And so I like to think of it this way, that God, and again, I'm speaking in metaphor, right? God, I'll have to say, gives us the vision of the world as it could be. We need to take the step, we individually, as a community, as a world, need to take the step to make that happen. But we have the faith that it could happen, right? That's what hope and faith is. Because we can screw up, but that's where, like, it doesn't mean that things are going to turn out okay. It means that things can turn out okay, right? That's what faith is, right? Or hope is. And that's what, to use a Jewish, language, that's what it means walk in the ways of God, I think. Walk in the ways of God,
So that would seem to me that when they were doing this translation for us Reform Jews, that they should have said, help us to halt the onslaught.
Right.
Or help us,
Right,
because,
okay, so,
so this kind of goes, I think there are,
yeah,
our ancestors they're smart, but they are also pretty superstitious.
sure.
So I think this goes back to why some people read this literally.
Right, yes, good. So, now I'll give a very elitist answer.
So
So
we're smart enough to read it that way.
the Rambam, yes, the Rambam, Maimonides, is one of the greatest Jewish thinkers of all time, lived 800 years ago. He would say there are many levels to read the Torah and liturgy and things like that. The regular people can read it that way because we need to live in a community with each other, and it's okay, they're not hurting anybody, and maybe they are, but you'd say we can read it differently, right?
We're not getting the vaccine. Okay.
Yeah, well, maybe, but it's built into traditional Jewish life that if your rabbi says get the vaccine in Orthodox life, if the rabbi says get a vaccine, then it's law. You have to get a vaccine, right? Yeah. So yes, so we also have to think of liturgy as poetry, right? Liturgy is not prose, right? Okay. Other ideas, questions, thoughts? So I want to go back to the, so what does it mean, Avinu and Malkeinu? Let's talk a little bit about kingship, because it ties in with this week's Torah portion, Shoftim, where it has the laws of the king. And the king is not allowed to be above the people. This is the earthly king. He's not allowed to be above the people. It has to follow law. They didn't do that. Like the kings in the history of the Israelites were all bad, except David was sometimes good, and Hezekiah was okay, and Josiah was okay. The rest were bad. Like we're the only people in the world that writes our history, our ancient sources, and says how bad we are all the time, right? And how bad our leaders are. But so the kingship, right? But when we talk about God as king, what's the image? Now, it says, I think someone mentioned already, it says right in the opening of the Torah, we're created B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. In the ancient world, who, outside of the Israelites, who was created in the image of God? The king was created in the image of the God. Everybody, like in ancient Egypt, the Pharaoh was like an incarnation of one of the gods. The Roman emperor, later the Roman emperors said they were gods, right? But in Babylon, it was like, the king was like an earthly kind of manifestation of the god, of the chief god. But what is it saying in the Torah is that we are all in the image of God. So what is it saying? We are all what? We're all kings and queens. Right? So even this image of God as king is if you know the history of the term in the Torah, it's a different image, right? Okay.
I never made that leap. That's so funny. I was just trying to get my arms around it.
Right.
I mean, being created in the image of God, I just thought of it in a very different way.
Yeah.
So to think that it meant that we're all creators,
Yeah.
queens and kings is like very different.
That might have been, we don't know the intent, the intention of the writers of the Torah, but that might have been it. or one of the ways of seeing it. We are all endowed with this dignity and this highness, if you will.
We're all equal.
And we're all equal. That's what it means, definitely.
Well,
Yeah.
Or-
But then, so think of God as the king, right? Also endows us with kingliness, if you will, right?
There are no pawns,
There are no pawns. Good.
pawns in the world.
There are no pawns. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
I just,
Mhm.
I'm the Christian resident here today. We tend in my faith tradition to think about God as a father, we're all children of God.
Right. Sure.
And
Sure. Which
not
comes
so
from
much
us too.
From the
But
king, exactly.
That comes from the-
Not so much the focus on being the king, but
Mm.
we are all children of God and
Mm.
we're responsible for each other.
yeah.
And God lives within us.
Yeah.
In our speech, in our hearts, and in our actions.
Good.
So that's kind of where
Yeah.
we live.
Good. Exactly. Exactly.
I don't know, that's helpful.
Yeah,
Another way to
I think-
about it.
I think so. I think so. Okay. So let's, questions, comments? So, okay. So we have, so I think it's a different vision of kingship, right? That kingship is not just about up there, but it's also about down here. The king is also our father, if you will, also our parent, let's say, right? And it's mixed together, the judgment, the loftiness with the closeness, the judgment with the mercy, right? Because we need the judgment. We're not good, right? We as humans are not always good. We as a community, we as a country, we're not always good. We need that judgment, and we need the mercy to live, right? We need the compassion. Good. The chesed. Okay. So, questions, comments? Okay. So now let's go back to Arthur Green, but this time it's stories that he brings that are on this page. Okay.
Is he Bob with the synagogue?
Is he what?
He wasn't a rabbi, was he?
I don't know if he's ever worked at a synagogue. He's the head of a rabbinical school in Boston, of a non-Orthodox rabbinical school. He was the founder in Boston, like, in the 60s the beginning of the Havurah movement. He founded Havarat Shalom, I think it was called. Havarat Shalom, which kind of became kind of a synagogue, but
So does he see himself as following in the steps of Buber a little bit?
for sure, he departs with Buber in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a whole other class, but yeah, in a lot of ways, yeah. So, so this, I brought these stories here. These are Hasidic stories where it says 1 and 2 that come from his work, his newest book called Judaism for the World, that is a lot of essays on different areas of Jewish life. This comes from his essay on Rosh Hashanah. So I want to read, and these are two versions of a story that he brings from Rabbi Dov Ber, the Maggid of Mezrich, who Maggid means the preacher, as it says there. He was the main disciple of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism. Okay, so now let's think of kingship and parenthood and kingship as we read these stories. Okay, they're kind of two versions of one story. So I guess someone online can read. See where it says number 1, the Roman numeral 1.
I'll read
Okay, please, Sharon.
if I can. There was a king who sent his only son away to a distant land, for some reason known only to him. As time passed, the son became accustomed to the ways of the villagers among whom he lived. He became a wayward fellow, forgetting the niceties of life with the king. Even his mind and his most intimate nature grew coarse. In his mind, he came to think ill of the kingdom. One day, the son heard that the king was going to visit the province where he lived. When the king arrived, The son entered the palace where he was staying and began to shout out in a strange voice. His shout was in wordless sound, since he had forgotten the king's language. When the king heard his son's voice and realized that he had even forgotten how to speak, his heart was filled with compassion. This is the meaning of sounding the shofar.
Okay, let's unpack that story. Okay, so when we say king in a parable like this, what is it, a metaphor for? God, usually.
God.
But at the same time, this king is also he's a father, right? He's an actual parent here, right? Okay, so what is this about? Let's see, what did the son do? So the king sent the son away.
Came a wayward fellow.
Right. So this could be a story about, the
Prodigal son.
Jews in exile. It could be. Or let's go back to Arthur Green, who's saying, let's look within. What is it about? All these stories can be read on many different levels, and that's the point of a good story. But let's talk about it again with the inward metaphor.
So it'd be someone who forgot who he was in some sense. Maybe
Forgot
was
who-
not in touch with himself and his history and his connection to where he came from.
Right. But at the same time, it's interesting that it was the king who kind of decreed that, kind of like knew that might happen, right? So think about it, like we send our kids off. We send our kids to college in today's terms, right? We send our kids to college. We don't know what's going to happen to them. And we know they're not going to be little versions of us anymore, right?
What?
Yeah.
They're grounded.
Don't say that.
Right,
Moral
yeah.
center and a compass, a moral
Yeah,
compass,
yeah.
a moral compass.
So what happens though when they go astray, or they might go astray, that they can always do what?
Can always come home.
They can, but they need both parties to turn to each other, right? Okay, so what else, what other kind of things are we getting from the story?
Could it be a story of assimilation?
It could be, yeah, for sure. We Jews are living all over the world and we've lost our Jewish way. That could be that too, yeah. That, like, think about, here, I'm getting on my soapbox. We don't know the king's language anymore. We don't know Hebrew.
We don't speak Hebrew anymore.
We're the first Jewish generation. We have the most tools of any Jews in the world, most tools to learn. But American Jews, it's all at our fingertips. We're the most Hebrew, we're the most Hebrew illiterate of Jews ever, right? Since ancient times when the Jews in Alexandria only knew Greek. Yeah, so it's also an elitist thing. Probably most Jews didn't know Hebrew very well, but enough. Right?
In Hebrew schools, they only taught us to read.
Right, because
Not to speak the language.
why? Because Americanism became the predominant mode to be an American.
To be fair, they only allowed boys to learn Hebrew.
Right, so it was also boy, yes.
Right.
Go back in the-
Yeah.
Girls were there, we would have learned more.
Even that, Hebrew was only instrumental for the boys to have a bar mitzvah. That's why they only allowed the boys, because it was only a tool. Hebrew was just a tool to be able to get up on the bima.
But even in Europe, boys learned Hebrew, the girls spoke Yiddish. So
Spoke.
every-
Yeah, true.
And
No,
they made prayer books for girls. and
yeah, true. But the boys learned to navigate texts. It wasn't just the mouth words they didn't understand. Right. So, okay, what else could this story be about? So the second part, go ahead.
What I find interesting is that, the son forgot everything, but the king sort of blames himself. He said, I pushed him away. It's
Yeah,
not, so, the direct thing is using king as God as metaphor. When you're away from God, you lose the ability to be part of the oneness, to speak the language, whatever else. But the
Yeah.
interesting thing to me here is the king didn't say, son, you forgot. He said, I'm sorry I pushed you away.
Yeah, wonderful.
Okay.
And it's kind of like, so let's think, because this is a story for the High Holy Days, because it ends with the shofar, right? You know, sorry, just a second. It drives me crazy, me as the rabbi, that people only come for Rosh Hashanah. If only they would come for Shabbat, they would like it more. And I think they don't like it that much because they only come for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but that's another story. But at the same time, they're being drawn to return. That's what it's saying. The son is being drawn to return, but he just doesn't know how, right? And the sound of the shofar is like all the Jews coming out of the woodwork, being drawn to return, their cry to return, right?
And the king was not angry,
The king was not angry.
he
Yeah.
showed compassion.
Yep. God is waiting for us there. Maybe especially at the High Holy Days, right? For the cries, right? So like the son's cry was like just an outburst of emotion, right? That's all it was. Yeah.
It was interesting that the king didn't forget the son, but the son forgot the king.
Yeah.
And the king didn't really understand what consequences would be.
Yeah.
He realized which meant he didn't even conceive of this possibility.
Right.
That it would go so far and
Right.
it would become so estranged.
Right. So God gave us, let's say, free will or the ability to live in the world, right? That was, God's drawing back.
Seems so.
Yeah, and we could do whatever we want with it. God doesn't have the power to stop us, it's kind of saying, right? But then is waiting there, or maybe even is waiting, but also taking an active role in bringing us back too, right? God came to the province where his son was, right? Came there, go and find it, search it out, right? So it's like both partners are moving here, right? Yeah, good. Should we do the next?
If it's any consolation to you, Rabbi, I know we've been talking about your upsetness with people that only come for the High Holy.
Yeah.
At the Presbyterian Church on the Green, they call them C&E Christians.
Yeah, right. Christmas and Easter. Yeah.
Christmas and Easter, so it's-
Exactly.
It's across the spectrum.
Yeah, of course. It's, yes,
It's true.
right. I mean, American religion is very much about convenience a lot of times. And so, okay, good. So let's read story number 2.
Okay.
So someone at home want to take story number 2. Oh, sorry, I got to put it back up there. You see it?
Yeah. I think so.
Okay, someone at home want to read it?
I'm waiting for cataract surgery, so
Okay.
I'm reading the
I'll
book.
read it. I'll read it.
Okay, good.
A king sent his beloved children to a far-off country. They spent long years there, exiled from their father's table, but they were constantly concerned with how to get back, how to come to dwell again in the restful home of their fathers in a most royal court. How happy they had been when sharing their father's joy. How much better things were then than now. They began to send affectionate messages to their father, hoping he would take pity on them and bring them back. But once they got close enough to the royal court, they saw their father's countenance was not the same as it once had been. They kept calling out and begging for his mercy, but they were met with silence. After a long period of receiving no reply, the king's children began to wonder what they might yet do to reawaken their father's former love. Why is it that we call out and receive no answer? Surely our Father has no lack of mercy. There must be some reason for this. They decided that maybe over the course of their years in the distant land, that they had forgotten the king's language. We became so mixed up with other nations that we took on their ways and started speaking their language. We have no way to communicate with the king. This is why our words are not heard in his palace. So they decided to stop calling out in words or language. They would just let out a simple cry to arouse his mercy, since a cry without words can be understood by anyone.
Okay. So what's the difference in this story?
I'm more self-aware.
Yeah, good. The children are more self-aware, right? And it's more than one, it's children. So it makes us think about, it's not just an individual religious life, that it's the communal religious life, maybe. Yeah.
But there's not any compassion from him.
Right. Yeah.
Because there's no, like, does he even recognize them?
It's much more of a silent God. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's also, I was wondering, why is it that we call out and receive no answer? That's going back to the whole idea.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Right. So like, we pour our hearts out in prayer. Hopefully, I want you to pour your hearts out in prayer, especially at the high holy days. But what do you hear back? Is it just a monologue? Right? Or are we just listening in the wrong way?
Right. I think what it's saying is we're speaking in the wrong way. It's saying God wants to hear from the heart, that guttural, nonverbal way, as opposed to just reciting the prayers. That's a theme that comes all the way through the high holiday literature. I want to hear it from your heart.
Yeah, good. And then it seems like the children figured out, well, the heart is really just crying, right? That the language is not the important part, right? That it's the cry that comes out, right?
I still think though, when I come to high holiday services, for me, it's how I'm going to be after I walk out the door. And so I'm not looking for God to do anything or answer me or hear me or anything. It's all the interest,
Right.
What am I hearing from myself?
Okay, so why don't we change the language a little bit and say that, why take God out of that? Why do we have to say that's not God? Right, that's what if I could channel Arthur Green, maybe. Why do we think that's not God? Because we learned in Hebrew school, or we learned from pop culture or whatever, God is this, therefore I don't believe in God.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I also don't believe in God then, right? So there you go. Right.
Because I grew up, I didn't grow up with any religion.
Mhm.
So my religious education was Jesus Christ Superstar. Like serious. I'm not, that's not a joke. So the thought of like praying to God is like praying to something above that I just don't believe is there.
Right.
But being able to look at myself, and that's a complete that I can do, just why I like this.
Right, but what I'm saying, or I'm to try to maybe channel Arthur Green, why are you selling that short? You're saying that praying inward, let's say, is not praying to God. That's what you're saying.
Okay, but I wouldn't call it, I guess I don't call it God.
Because we're embarrassed. So I don't know if this is sometimes we as liberal Jews, right, are embarrassed to say that we're calling out to God, maybe because we think that's what the Pentecostals do or whatever, or because we think God is this one thing, and therefore what I do is not that, right? And therefore, but we're Jews, we use God language, right? So why isn't what you're doing, I'm just trying to push a little bit, why isn't what you're doing praying to God?
Don't we risk of going back to idol worship if we think of ourselves?
That it's only about yourself.
As God, just like if we thought of a tree.
Right,
as a God.
for sure.
So maybe part of it is God, and part of why it's important to come together at the holidays is, if God's in us, if we're part of this Godness, if we're part of this oneness, we have to be with other parts of the oneness.
Yes, good.
In order to feel the awe and glory of the all-encompassing.
Yes.
And if we try to just do it, we can look in ourselves to get in touch with that part of us that's connected to all the other
Everybody,
parts.
right.
And if we just think of just ourselves as God, I think that's a problem.
Yes,
But
yes.
if we think of ourselves as, if we can connect to it, and that allows us to connect to the other parts, then we can find true awesomeness.
Yes.
right?
Good, yeah. I think that's definitely what he's saying. Yeah. Right, which kind of goes back to like the last few words of what we read in the other package. The inner sight that we develop in moments that leads us to an ability to see the inwardness of all creatures, to come to know them as many faces of the one, right? Yeah, exactly. So it's not only, so it's, I'm not blaming you, Meg, but I'm going to use you as an example, that it's,
He doesn't even have the language.
right, exactly. It's a language problem.
Yeah.
A lot of our problem, I'll say a lot of our problem with quote belief in God is a language problem. Right? And sorry, I'm on a roll right here, so I'll get back to you in a second. So to say that it's only me looking in myself, right? That's too much ego, right? Because I don't think that's actually what you're doing. It's you looking in yourself, connecting
Yeah.
with something bigger than yourself.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? And then what I'm saying is, why is that not praying to God? Right? Because it's the inward and the outward at the same time.
Over and over, and it's great. Thinking of being-
You know, so there you go. There you go. We all have our own baggage. Right. Okay. So
I was
Beth.
gonna piggyback,
Yeah.
if you're grounded in faith, to me, it's a given that you're praying to God.
Right. So, but it's partly a language issue, right? So,
Yeah, I mean,
so
the
we're
person of
ground.
faith, there's a cynical person, I'm assuming. I mean,
Right. So it's
I think
like,
of faith is being grounded in God.
but it's partly being grounded in a language,
Okay.
right? And I'm not talking about Hebrew versus English or what. It's the language we use.
The way of talking about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Even just saying.
Mhm,
Mhm.
mhm.
I know where
Exactly.
you're coming from, I understand.
Yeah. Good. People online, comments, questions.
Rabbi, the two stories,
Yeah.
could they be kind of divided the way that you look at Avinu Malkeinu, justice and mercy? The
Yeah.
first story is a look for justice, and the second story is a look for mercy.
It could be, maybe, right. So I took these stories from this section in his book here where he's talking about Avinu Malkeinu.
Right. So he's got the dichotomy, you need a just belief and you need a compassionate belief.
Perhaps, yeah, I think so.
As a parent, you need both. In a belief system, you need both. You have to believe that there will be justice. You have to believe that there will be mercy.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I think so. And I think that's why Avinu, even though the words are very masculine, and you know, it doesn't have to be the scary, it's not meant to be a scary image, it's meant to be a balanced image, right?
That's funny, because the second story does seem sadder to me. sometimes.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, don't you feel that?
Yeah,
There's something about.
right. But it's like, yeah,
Because
go.
you get no reaction from the other side.
Yeah,
There's no.
There's coming together in the first, so you're talking about.
Yeah, they come together.
Meeting.
What, the second story doesn't have an ending,
Right.
Yeah.
right? It doesn't have an ending. It leaves us wondering what happened next. Yeah, what happened next? But maybe that crying is like, maybe the crying is enough.
Hmm.
Right? Yeah, and so I just put up on the screen, this is the book that I got that out of, and a lot of my ideas or a lot of the things that I was teaching came from his essay on Rosh Hashanah in this book. So, you know, here's another resource for you all to get. Good. So next week, well, it's going to be lunchtime, right? Is that next week or in 2 weeks?
Next week is the lunch.
Next week's going to be lunchtime. I haven't decided which modern thinker I'll bring next week, but maybe it will be more of a, you know, bring back a vertical metaphor again, okay? But we'll kind of have the same the same structure where we'll talk about a contemporary thinker, look at the high holidays, and then see where the conversation goes. So yeah,
So maybe we'll be in the social hall, so
Mhm.
we can be really spread out.
sure,
So we can take our masks off
great.
and, you know, we'll do that.
Great,
I will have to do next week on Zoom.
that's fine.
I'll
But-
have to do it on YouTube. I'll be away with
Yeah, no
no internet.
So yeah, so I'm recording this. You could get the recording from me and I'll put it up on our YouTube page or, you know, on our
Okay.
Facebook page and stuff too. So any closing thoughts or questions?
This was very helpful to me because,
Yeah.
as I've said to you before, I'm married to my husband is modern Orthodox. My kids go to a Jewish day school, and I was raised Reform, and so I'm kind of floating in between. And I studied. Anyway, it's just my belief in God is very amorphous, I'd say. So it's helpful for me to hear this.
Amorphous is good. And I would say nothing that I said tonight is specifically Reform.
Right.
You know, it's using different kinds of Jewish resources to help us develop a language.
Humanistic.
It's not humanistic. If it was humanistic, I wouldn't say God.
Yeah.
I said God. I push you all to use the word God, the G word, right?
The G word.
Yep.
I think it's up to debate.
Oh, he's right. Okay, friends. Have a good night. Be safe, and I will see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.